In the 1980s, professional wrestling was big, but the name Hulk Hogan was huge. For more than 3 decades, Hulk Hogan was a real American hero inside the ring and out.
There was Beatlemania in the 60s, but in the 80s it was all about Hulkamania.
But Hogan's whole world came crashing down in 2012 when a scandalous tape emerged showing him having sex with his best friend's wife and making racist comments.
Was the sex tape newsworthy and a public interest? That was the big question.
On this episode of Fortune Fights, husband and wife media experts and attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris explore how Hulk Hogan made a $30 million fortune and then lost big in a divorce, only to gain it all back and then some, while laying a smackdown on the First Amendment. He was the bleach blonde, shirt shredding, bandana donning superstar who took professional wrestling mainstream in the 1980s.
Hulk Hogan is in the building!
For more than 30 years, he packed arenas, rallied a legion of fans, and slammed Hulkamania down on his opponents with a force felt around the world.
Hulk Hogan was a living, breathing superhero to many of his young fans. He built a reputation as being the good guy. He didn't take cheap shots in the ring. He always helped the underdog. He loved America, and he even had a wholesome mantra.
Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, be true to yourself, true to your country, be a real American.
With a larger-than-life persona and physique, Hogan transcended the sport, starring in major Hollywood films, his own TV action series, and a reality show centering on his family and wife, Linda.
For 3 decades, Hogan was able to cash in on a celebrity and amass a fortune that extended far beyond the ropes.
So it really didn't matter if you were a wrestling fan or not. Everyone knew who Hulk Hogan was.
But that wholesome all-American appeal came crashing down when Hogan found himself entrenched in a public sex scandal that ultimately led to a multi-layered fortune fight.
The sex tape not only destroyed Hogan's character, it also destroyed his career and single-handedly ruined their 25-year marriage. But in true Hulk Hogan fashion, he didn't go down without a fight.
I don't think that Hogan had any idea when he went to court the massive ramifications to the First Amendment that his case could have.
But before there was Hulk Hogan, the beloved wrestler turned public pariah, there was Terry Jean Bollea. Born in 1953, Bollea grew up in Florida and developed a love for wrestling, watching small-time matches around his home state. In 1977, clocking in at 6'7" and nearly 300 pounds, 24-year-old Bollea began his own career in Florida's regional leagues, wrestling under an assortment of stage names including the Super Destroyer and Sterling Golden.
So Hulk in his early days was not only just a physical specimen, he was a showman. He was the complete package.
He was big, he was tan, he was loud, and he was a bigger-than-life character.
In 1978, 28-year-old Bollea traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, where he wrestled in his first match for the Continental Wrestling Association, a league known for its over-the-top pageantry.
Hulk Hogan, up until this point, was making about $150 a week in northern Florida and Alabama, which wasn't a lot of money at all. But once the promoters in Memphis saw what Hogan had to offer, they guaranteed him $800 a week, which is a fantastic salary back then.
Bollea fought his way to the top of the CWA with chokeholds, body slams, and what would become his signature finishing move, the leg drop.
Yes, sir! Get him, Hogan! What is he doing? Go get him, baby! Oh!
The promising young wrestler also picked up a gargantuan nickname along the way.
Bollea was promoting an upcoming match on a local Memphis TV station, and Lou Ferrigno happened to be the other guest on the show. Of course, at the time, he played the Incredible Hulk on TV. But the funny thing was when you looked at Bollea and Ferrigno next to each other, Bollea was way, way bigger. So from then on, he was known as Terry the Hulk Boulder.
In 1979, a year after joining the CWA, Terry the Hulk Bollea caught the eye of Vince McMahon, who ran the sport's premier league, the World Wrestling Federation, currently known as World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE. After signing the 26-year-old, McMahon decided the Hulk needed an Irish-sounding last name, so he suggested Hogan.
The Incredible Hulk Hogan!
Vince McMahon loved to play the cultural angle when it came to booking his wrestlers. And Vince McMahon wanted Terry Bollea to transform into this Irish mega superstar, as we know him, Hulk Hogan.
I remember how far-reaching Hulk Hogan's impact was, all the way from adults down to little kids.
In 1981, with his wrestling career on the rise, Hogan began dating Linda Claridge, a beautiful blonde 6 years his junior.
He says in his autobiography that she was the most positive, upbeat, happy person he had ever met. He was living in Florida and she was living in Los Angeles, where she owned a nail salon.
The couple spent the next 2 years in a long-distance relationship because of Hogan's wrestling engagements, which had him traveling across the globe.
In 1982, Hogan's career caught a major boost when he landed a role in Sylvester Stallone's Rocky III.
Hogan's character in the movie was a wrestler named Thunderlips, who went against Rocky Balboa in an exhibition match. Before the movie came out, die-hard wrestling fans knew who he was, but the general public really didn't know the name Hulk Hogan. That all changed after the movie came out and Hulk Hogan became a household name.
A year later, Hogan married his girlfriend, Linda Claridge.
The wedding was attended by several wrestling greats such as Andre the Giant and WWE owner Vince McMahon.
By the fall of 1984, Hogan had proven himself a star both inside the ring and out. But no one had any idea just how big the Hulkster was about to become.
It was January 1984, Madison Square Garden. The Iron Sheik, WWF Heavyweight Champion, versus the challenger Hulk Hogan in his very first title shot. Hulk Hogan managed to escape the dreaded finisher of the Iron Sheik, the camel clutch. Then he pinned the Iron Sheik in the middle of the ring, 1, 2, 3, winning the WWF Heavyweight Championship. The roof blew off of Madison Square Garden. At that point, the madness was born, and it was called Hulkamania.
Hulkamania will live forever!
There was Beatlemania in the 60s, but in the 80s it was all about Hulkamania. Kids and adults alike went bonkers for Hulk Hogan, who acted like a wild man in the ring, but really was a nice guy outside the ring, and people connected to that.
Hogan became the face of the WWF in the 1980s and the league's highest earner, reportedly making $10 million per year in his Hulkamania peak.
On top of his salary, Hulk Hogan was making an additional hundreds of thousands of dollars per year from big pay-per-view events like the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam. He had it written into his contract that he would get a certain part of the take.
And Hulk Hogan's face wasn't just on TV, it was everywhere. He was making money hand over fist.
There were Hulk Hogan lunchboxes, t-shirts, action figures. He was also the first and only wrestler to ever appear on the cover of Sports Illustrated. To this day, he was on Johnny Carson, he appeared at the Grammys with Cyndi Lauper. I mean, he was like a pop culture phenomenon.
He built the Hulk Hogan brand, and he was able to capitalize on that for many years.
Most professional wrestlers don't have much of a career beyond the ring. Hulk Hogan was the exception. He had a dynamic personality, indomitable will, and he was fun to watch.
What you gonna do when Hulkamania run wild on you?
With his career riding high, Hogan and his wife Linda welcomed a daughter, Brooke, in 1988, and a son, Nick, 2 years later.
Hulk Hogan said that having kids changed his life, that they gave him purpose. For many years, it was just Hulk Hogan on the road constantly, but now he has a family to provide for. So sometimes he would fly home just for a few hours to tuck his kids into bed, just to turn around and leave and fly to the next town.
Hulk Hogan had a clean-cut image as wholesome, American.
Hogan would go on to win 3 heavyweight titles in the 1990s, as well as returning to the big screen in movies including Suburban Commando, Mr. Nanny, and Santa with Muscles.
People who are able to channel their personality into a brand or into something that sustains itself beyond one career tend to be people who are good actors.
So all these acting gigs were financial bonuses for him. He was raking in a couple $100,000 here, $1 million there. I mean, he was raking in the cash.
In the 2000s, Hogan remained a beloved figure in professional wrestling, reinventing his image through the years and growing his fortune on the way. By 2002, the 49-year-old's net worth was reportedly over $30 million.
Hogan provided his family with an extravagant lifestyle. He purchased a 20,000 square foot mansion in Clearwater, Florida. And if that wasn't enough, fancy cars, boats, you name it, he had it.
But years of abuse in the ring took a toll on his body.
Hulk Hogan became more and more injured as time went on, forcing him to take time off the road.
Even with his appearances in the wrestling ring slowing down by 2003, Hogan's larger-than-life persona continued to transcend the sport.
Hogan was doing radio shows, media appearances, hosting wrestling events.
In 2004, Hogan appeared in a one-hour VH1 documentary about his 16-year-old daughter, Brooke, an aspiring singer trying to break into the music industry.
The album is called Undiscovered. It's coming out digitally September 26th.
Everyone knew Hulk as this real over-the-top kind of character, so there was a lot of intrigue about what was he like at home. What did he like to eat for breakfast? What kind of dad was he? People were fascinated by him.
The show was a hit, and VH1 developed it into a reality series the following year called Hogan Knows Best.
The premise for the show was that it followed the life of the wrestling icon at home with his wife and their two children, Nick and Brooke.
The show's 2005 launch attracted the largest ever audience for a VH1 premiere and introduced Hulk Hogan to a whole new audience. But not every moment was endearing.
The reality show showed Hulk Hogan as a very overprotective father who had little tolerance for his daughter Brooke's dating life.
That's right, boys are different than girls, thank you.
Why are there different sets of rules with him and me?
Simply because girls can get pregnant and boys can't.
We also saw some conflict between Hogan and Claridge that gave us an indication that their relationship wasn't as solid as maybe they would have liked.
Don't be stubborn.
It pisses me off because you and I have talked about this. We're supposed to be on the same team.
Hogan's larger-than-life persona crumbles under the weight of a shocking controversy, setting the stage for a legal battle.
Hogan would go on to apologize, saying, "There's no excuse for it, and I apologize for having done it."
On Fortune Fights, attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris explore the legal ups and downs of some of America's biggest household names. And in the 1980s, Hulk Hogan was one of the biggest names in professional wrestling and beyond. Hogan's over-the-top style earned him a massive fan base and a $30 million fortune. In 2005, the 51-year-old parlayed his fame as a wrestler into a successful reality TV series called Hogan Knows Best.
The premise for the show was that it followed the life of the wrestling icon at home with his wife and their two children, Nick and Brooke.
But reality TV was getting a little too real for the Hogan family. Much of the series centered around the couple's daughter, Brooke, and her attempt to break into the music industry. But it was also a revealing window into the family dynamic. Helping her on her first album was friend and mentor, 33-year-old Christiane Plant.
Plant was much older than Brooke, who was only 17 at the time, and she was a recurring character, so she seemed close with the whole family.
What viewers didn't see was that Hogan's marriage was on the rocks, and Brooke's friend Christiane was right in the middle of it.
Hogan's wife Linda accused him of having an affair with their daughter's best friend, Plant. In an interview with the National Enquirer, Plant later verified this and admitted to the affair.
Linda released a statement to Access Hollywood saying, "Hulk Hogan's serial cheating destroyed our marriage, our family, and our future."
All of a sudden, people were saying he's not the guy we thought he was. Hulk Hogan is supposed to be this true American hero, but it turns out he was far from it for a lot of people, and that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Despite being one of VH1's highest-rated series for 2 consecutive years, production on Hogan Knows Best was canceled in the summer of 2007. In November of that year, after 23 years of marriage, Hogan's wife, Linda, filed for divorce.
Hogan was apparently unaware she had filed until a reporter called to get his side of the story, so he must have been totally shocked.
In the divorce filing, Claridge sought a majority of the assets in the marital estate. She also asked for custody of their 17-year-old son, Nick.
Many couples with fame and fortune do a prenuptial agreement. That way, in the event that they divorce, it's determined ahead of time who receives what. But Hogan and Claridge never did a prenup agreement.
In Florida, when there's no prenuptial agreement, any assets acquired during the marriage will be divided with a starting point of 50-50, but that split could shift one way or the other based on a number of factors, including the length of the marriage, contributions to the marital estate, economic factors, earning potential of each spouse, and any other factor that a judge feels is equitable.
After spending the majority of his career as a good guy in the ring, Hogan would step into divorce court as the villain.
To say that a judge isn't going to hold Hogan accountable for cheating and breaking up the marriage would be naive. You can be sure that it would play a major factor in the judge exercising discretion to decide how much alimony should be paid.
And when there's a child custody battle in play, fault has a huge role in the divorce proceedings. Judges put the best interest of the children first and foremost, but it's very easy to say that the best interest of the children will not be served by spending too much time with a parent who has a serious adultery problem.
In 2008 court listings, the couple's net worth was listed at between $26 and $32 million. With a court date set for the following year, Linda wasted no time moving on with her own love life.
She began a relationship with 19-year-old Charlie Hill. This was when she was 48 years old.
At the time, Hogan was co-hosting a reboot of the American Gladiators TV series. And while he maintained his tough guy persona on screen, behind closed doors, his life was breaking down.
In his book, My Life Outside the Ring, Hogan says that the empty house reminded him of everything he lost. It drove him to a really deep depression. He said he was even chasing Xanax with swigs of rum, and he even put a gun to his head.
Hogan said, quote, "I could feel the life draining out of me. It had me curling my index finger on the trigger of a loaded handgun and putting it in my mouth."
However, after an unexpected phone call from his American Gladiator co-host, Layla Ali, Hogan snapped out of his funk.
He said that phone call saved his life.
Hogan has said publicly that he went on to recover from that low point by rediscovering his faith and then meeting Jennifer McDaniel.
Just 2 months after his wife filed for divorce, Hogan met and began dating McDaniel, a 34-year-old makeup artist living in Florida.
When they started dating, Jennifer McDaniel was 34, Hogan was 55. The age difference and the fact that McDaniel had a very strong resemblance to Hogan's daughter Brooke, it was very good fodder for the tabloids.
The fact that Hogan moved on so quickly really didn't reflect well on his image. And his wife Linda moved on quickly too, and the press was eating it up. There was a media frenzy about everything Hogan and Linda were doing.
For nearly 2 years following their divorce filing, Hogan and Linda remained locked in bitter court battles over the settlement.
Linda's lawyer told People magazine that it was going to be war, and it pretty much was. They argued over everything from money to real estate. They took personal shots at each other. Hogan tried to prevent Linda's 19-year-old boyfriend from living in the family home and driving the car. It kept going on and on and on.
Finally, on July 28, 2009, a settlement was reached.
Linda Hogan scored big in the divorce. Now, Hogan had taken some bad beatings before in the ring, but nothing like this.
He probably agreed to this arrangement to avoid taking his chances in a trial before a judge. There's certainly a big publicity factor at work here. If Hogan went to trial and all of his infidelities were exposed in detail in a public forum, his reputation and future earning potential could take a big hit. But of course, Claridge's attorneys knew this and undoubtedly leveraged it to score the largest potential split of assets.
Hogan was down for the count, but the biggest blow was still to come.
After Hogan's cheating scandal and the bitter divorce, it looked like the sex tape would be the knockout punch.
Kicking off a royal battle in the courtroom.
It came down to Hogan's right to privacy versus the media's right to free speech. Clearly, this was shaping up to be the most important fight of Hulk Hogan's career.
Hulk Hogan was a superstar professional wrestler who made his reality TV debut in VH1's Hogan Knows Best in 2005. On the show, viewers got an inside look at a man who had built a nearly spotless career as America's good guy in the ring. But under the microscope, cracks began to appear in Hogan's armor, and fans were shocked when they learned about a secret affair Hogan had with his daughter's friend from the series, Christiane Plant. The show was promptly canceled in 2007. In response, Hogan's wife of 23 years, Linda, divorced the aging wrestler and hit him with a bruising settlement.
She won $7 million from their bank accounts, $3 million in other property settlement, and 40% interest in each of Hulk Hogan's other companies.
After all was said and done, Hogan's estranged wife received a little more than 70% of the couple's liquid assets. But court records show that she would not be receiving any additional financial support.
After a 23-year marriage, you'd expect to see some significant alimony or spousal support being paid. But in this case, Claridge elected to receive a higher property settlement in lieu of receiving the alimony. It's almost like she preferred to be Hulk Hogan's partner going forward in his businesses because she knew she would get more of his earning capacity that way than getting straight alimony.
It's really unusual for spouses who go through an ugly divorce to walk away business partners at the end of it, but that's exactly what happened in this case. They were no longer partners in marriage, but they were partners in business.
The day after the filings went public, Hogan tweeted what seemed to be a targeted message that read, "Thank God any negative or blood-sucking vampires are dead and gone in my life. One love, one life, one God."
After the divorce was finalized, Hogan was on the verge of bankruptcy.
Despite Hogan's financial troubles, he moved on with his personal life, marrying girlfriend Jennifer McDaniel in 2010. But just 2 years into their marriage, one of Hogan's earlier infidelities, one that occurred while he was still married to his first wife, came back to haunt him.
In October of 2012, an editor from the website Gawker posted a 2-minute clip of a 30-minute video. It was shot in 2006 before his wife filed for divorce, and it showed Hogan having sex with his best friend's wife, Heather Clem.
Heather Clem was the wife of Bubba the Love Sponge, a Tampa-based radio shock jock who was also a close friend of Hulk Hogan. The sex tape between Clem and Hogan was sent anonymously in the mail on a DVD to Gawker's headquarters in New York.
At the time, Gawker was reportedly getting more than 20 million hits a month. The story totally took off and was getting picked up by every other news outlet.
Having just dealt with one scandal and a bitter divorce, Hogan decided to face the story head-on.
He found venues where he'd get a sensitive or at least supportive hearing, and he made his case. And he made himself into a victim, which is very hard to do for a public figure.
Just days after the tape went public, Hogan appeared on The Howard Stern Show.
On the show, Hogan claimed that he slept with Heather with her husband Bubba's blessing and encouragement, but he said that he did not know he was being taped, which was a really important detail.
There's a tape of you and Heather.
First off, I'd never made a tape. I'd never said,
You swear
hey,
you were not in on this?
I swear to God I wasn't.
Allegedly, Bubba placed a hidden camera in his bedroom and encouraged his wife to have sex with Hogan. At the end of the video, Bubba can be heard saying that this video is a ticket to their retirement. Bubba would later testify that he took the DVD, wrote Hogan on it, and stored it in a desk drawer. But he insisted that he was not the one that sent it on to Gawker.
He blamed the trauma of his failing marriage for his behavior. He knew his marriage was essentially over and was alleviating stress by sleeping with Heather. Hogan called it a bad choice stemming from a very low point in his life, and he expressed remorse for his actions.
Hogan was working on damage control, but the real justice he sought would have to be won in the courtroom. On October 15, 2012, Hogan unleashed a tag-team assault, suing both Gawker Media and his friend Bubba Clem.
Hogan sued Bubba for invasion of privacy, saying he didn't know he was being videotaped. In Florida, in order to make an invasion of privacy claim, you need to prove that there was a physical or electronic intrusion into a private quarter, in this case, the bedroom, and that intrusion was highly offensive to a reasonable person.
Bubba defended his case by saying that Hogan knew he was on tape. And Bubba also said he didn't release the tape, it was stolen from his house. He even questioned whether Hogan released it himself.
There's 3 sides to every story. My side, your side, and the truth.
It was later determined by Florida police that an employee of Bubba Clem stole the DVD, among other sex tapes Clem kept of his wife, and released it to Gawker.
I was reckless in securing the DVD. I should have destroyed it immediately, like I was told to, and I put it in my office, and employees knew it were there, and they took it.
Hogan's lawsuit against Bubba Clem settled outside of court. Reportedly, they agreed that Bubba was going to pay $5,000 to Hogan in damages, and that Clem was going to testify on Hogan's behalf in the Gawker lawsuit. Shortly after the settlement, Bubba signed a letter recanting his previous statements and saying that Hogan had no idea he was being videotaped.
I would have hoped that it would have stayed amongst 3 adults and it would have never left my bedroom. I have to own my mistakes. It did happen. I wish it would have stayed private.
For Hogan, the settlement was a major victory. $5,000 was just pocket change, but Bubba's signed statement would be a powerful weapon when he went after his real target, Gawker Media.
Bubba's statement would be used to show that Hogan had no idea that he was being videotaped, and this was a key fact that his legal team was using to build a case against Gawker.
It was time for Hogan to face Gawker in the main event.
Hogan was seeking $100 million in damages. Hulkamania was heading to the courtroom.
Hulk Hogan's life was on the ropes, following a public affair with his daughter's friend, the cancellation of his popular reality TV show, and a bitter divorce from his wife of 23 years. In October 2012, things only got worse. After a tape showing the 59-year-old having sex with the wife of his longtime friend, radio shock jock Bubba Clem, was posted on Gawker's website, Hogan fired back, filing lawsuits against both Bubba and Gawker Media.
Hogan sued Bubba for invasion of privacy, saying he didn't know he was being videotaped.
And he also blamed Clem for releasing the tape to Gawker.
The parties settled outside the courtroom with two conditions. First, Clem was going to pay Hogan $5,000 in damages. And second, Clem was going to recant his previous statement and admit that Hogan didn't know he was being videotaped.
Hogan knew he faced an uphill battle against the well-protected media giant, but he was ready for a Royal Rumble.
If there was one word to describe Hulk Hogan in the ring, it was resilient.
Hogan's legal team filed suit in federal court. They sued Gawker, its founder, Nick Denton, and the editor who selected the footage, whose name was A.J. Delario.
They made a conscious decision to expose Terry Bollea naked and engaged in sex.
Hogan sought a temporary injunction against Gawker. He claimed they had invaded his right to privacy, violated his right of publicity, were negligent and intentionally inflicted emotional distress on him, and violated copyright law.
This court order would force them to remove the video from their website while waiting to go to trial.
The federal district court judge denied the motion. Courts are very wary of injunctions that impede the First Amendment rights of free speech and the press. This is called a prior restraint of free speech, and those requests are very rarely granted.
With their initial request denied, Hogan and his team decided to refile the temporary injunction in a Florida state court.
Sometimes lawyers can use tricks to move a case from federal court to state court to try to get a better judge that they think is going to be more favorable to their case. And that really was in place here, where Hulk Hogan was a golden boy in the state of Florida and didn't do well in his first go-around in federal court.
The strategy worked. The Florida judge granted the same type of injunction that Hogan asked for, but didn't get in federal court.
Gawker opposed the judge's order, calling it grossly unconstitutional.
We need a First Amendment to protect speech that is controversial.
But eventually removed the video from their website.
They took the position that the order violated their First Amendment rights. Then they posted a link to another site hosting it, essentially undermining the court order.
But Hogan didn't just want the video taken down. He wanted Gawker to pay a staggering $100 million for what he felt was a shot below the belt.
Invasion of privacy is not always clear-cut under the law. In fact, in the United States Constitution, there is no explicit right to privacy. However, cases that have come before the United States Supreme Court over the years have led to the development of the right of privacy as a recognized legal doctrine, so it is in play. However, the boundaries of the right of privacy change from time to time, sometimes year to year.
In Florida, for an invasion of privacy claim, there needs to be a physical or electronic intrusion into a private space, and that intrusion needs to be highly offensive to a reasonable person.
In the case, Hogan's right to privacy squared off against Gawker's First Amendment right of freedom of speech to publish the story and video.
The legal merits of the case turned on whether the tape was considered to be of public interest or whether it was newsworthy. If so, it would receive much stronger protection under the First Amendment.
That was the big question. Is a sex tape newsworthy? Does it have a current and legitimate public interest? We saw this issue take center stage back in the 2000s with Kim Kardashian.
Kardashian sued the company that posted the sex tape and received a $5 million settlement. But in her case, she knew she was being videotaped.
Hulk Hogan's was different. He didn't know he was being videotaped, so this was set to be a landmark case.
Hogan's next point of contention, his right of publicity.
The term right of publicity refers to an individual's right to control their own identity for profit. So here Hogan was saying, I've got the right to make money off of my identity and my fame. So he claimed that Gawker was violating this by misappropriating his name, likeness, image, identity, and persona by using the video and narrative for the purpose of commercial gain without his permission.
Again, this was a gray area in Hogan's case. Publicity rights only apply to commercial speech, like advertisements and endorsements. Is that what Gawker posted? It would be unclear how this would play out in court.
But as Hogan and his legal team prepared for trial, they were hit with a shot they never saw coming.
After the initial release of the sex tape, the National Enquirer and Radar Online did a joint investigation, and they found out some audio that would prove to be even more damning to the wrestler. In an unaired portion of the post, Hogan can be heard calling Brooks' then-boyfriend the N-word and saying how disgusted he is with the notion that his daughter is dating African-American men.
He was the hero to so many kids growing up in the 80s, and now that dream, the all-American dream of Hulkamania, was destroyed.
WWE had no choice but to break off its relationship with Hulk Hogan because so much of its fan base is family-oriented, teenagers, young kids looking up to the wrestlers. It was a decision that was probably easily reached.
So the WWE, trying to be politically correct, gets rid of all things Hogan, his toys. They kicked Hulk Hogan out of the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Hogan would go on to apologize for the comments, saying it was unacceptable for me to have used that offensive language. There's no excuse for it, and I apologize for having done it.
People were furious, which led to the reactions from the WWE and other companies that had done business with Hogan.
Hogan lost out on millions of dollars in potential income, but that wasn't all.
It was in many ways the end of his iconic personality.
With his reputation tarnished, Hogan would finally get his chance to redeem himself in court. In March of 2016, 4 years after the release of the sex tape, Hogan's trial against Gawker Media began.
To prove that his privacy really had been violated, Hogan needed to convince the jury that he was unaware that he had been videotaped. Now, of course, Hogan himself was going to take the stand and deny that he knew about it, but it would really help his case if he could get Bubba Clem to take the stand as well and testify that he recorded Hogan without his knowledge.
But during the trial, Clem backed out, pleading the fifth when he was called to testify in front of the jury.
At this point, Bubba said, whoa, 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 stop the clock. I'm going to invoke the Fifth Amendment so I don't have to testify and face possible criminal prosecution. The issue here is that he had flip-flopped before about whether or not Hogan knew he was being videotaped, so by pleading the Fifth, Clem didn't have to appear in front of the jury and face possible jail time.
Bubba's ex-wife, who was featured in the video, however, did take the stand.
Heather Clem had divorced Bubba, and by the time of the trial, she was Heather Cole. She said she didn't know Bubba was taping her or Hogan, but when she learned of it, she demanded the tape be destroyed, and she thought that it was.
The claim that Hogan and Cole did not know they were being filmed seemed valid, but Gawker's defense argued that fact had little relevance to their right to publish it.
Gawker's response was that the First Amendment gave the press the right to publish true content about public figures, even if the content was private. Of course, there was a caveat to this. The published content needed to be newsworthy and of current interest. Was that what Gawker posted? Was the sex tape newsworthy and of public interest? That was the big question.
Gawker argued this was a newsworthy event because it was details about a celebrity, and therefore they enjoyed First Amendment protections of freedom of the press. Hogan said this wasn't newsworthy, this was my private sex life, and I didn't know I was being videotaped. The key here is that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy because he had no knowledge of the videotape.
In response, Hogan's legal team zeroed in on a videotape deposition of A.J. Delario, the Gawker editor who'd edited the sex tape and written the post for their website. Hogan's lawyers argued that in his own testimony, Delario didn't believe the sex tape was newsworthy.
Delario just blew it. In his testimony, he came off as arrogant and uncaring. But even worse, he essentially admitted that this was not a newsworthy event. Their entire case was built around the fact that this was newsworthy, they said, so by he admitting that it wasn't, it blows the mind.
Reeling from Delario's deposition, the Gawker team pivoted to Hogan's public appearances both before and after the sex tape was released. They argued that by openly discussing his sex life and the tape itself on programs like The Howard Stern Show, Hogan had in effect waived his right to privacy.
Hogan had a detailed discussion with Stern on air about the video, how it depicted him, and he even bragged about his sexual prowess. He bragged about how big his member was, how he used it in this tape, and made jokes about it. So Gawker's argument was, if Hogan was willing to talk in that great of detail and make light of the situation, how could he be subject to harm by them airing the footage?
In response, Hogan and his lawyers tried to draw a distinction between Hulk Hogan, the larger-than-life wrestling persona, and Terry Bollea, the actual person who had been damaged by the sex tape.
So Hogan and his legal team had to find a way to try to distance themselves from the Howard Stern and other interviews. So what did Hogan say? He claimed that when he was on Stern, he was merely acting in character as Hulk Hogan. But the real-life version, Terry Bollea, he felt much differently about it, and Terry Bollea was injured, not Hulk Hogan.
This raises so many questions. Who came to the Howard Stern Show that day? Was it Terry Bollea? Was it Hulk Hogan? Was it Terry in character as Hulk Hogan? And could you even separate the two? And if Terry was in character as Hulk Hogan, wouldn't he be responsible for the things that Hulk Hogan said? I mean, there doesn't appear to be anyone who is directing him or telling him what to say on The Stern Show.
AJ Delario admitted that Terry Bollea's genitals were not newsworthy, but what about Hulk Hogan's? I mean, whose genitals were they? This case hinged on whether or not the person in the video was having sex with Hulk Hogan, a public figure, or Terry Bollea, a private person.
After 2 weeks in court, it was up to a jury to make sense of it all.
Was Hogan a victim whose fundamental privacy was violated? Or should websites be able to broadcast sex tapes of celebrities?
Now that question was in the hands of the jury. In 2015, Hulk Hogan was seeking $100 million in damages in what was poised to be a landmark case, his privacy versus Gawker's First Amendment rights. But in July of that year, Hogan's public image was body slammed when a previously unreleased portion of the sex tape leaked, where Hogan could be heard making racial slurs. Legal analysts and advisors Danielle and Andy Mayoris examine the heated match that ensued following the release of the recording and go inside the mind of a jury.
Juries are supposed to make decisions based on the evidence presented to them, in essence, using the law to decide these are the facts as we see them. But let's face it, juries are made up of people, and people often react based on emotions and who they like better. So it's not at all uncommon for juries to take a different view of the evidence in favor of somebody that they may like better or that they find more believable.
With a jury, it often comes down to who they sympathize with most. Who can they relate to more? Who do they like more? And even though Hulk Hogan's image had taken a major hit with his racist comments, he was charismatic and he knew how to work the crowd. And he was hoping he could use that charisma to make the jury forget his previous comments. In this case, the courtroom was his ring, the jury was his crowd, and he was going for a win in the biggest match of his life.
On March 18, 2016, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury had a verdict. Gawker was guilty.
Hulk Hogan and his legal team were pinning their case on common sense and human decency and doing what's right. For someone like Hulk Hogan, who'd been playing a character all of his life, and for whom most of the people in the jury box never knew as Terry Bollea, it seemed quite sympathetic and believable.
Terry Bollea had pulled off a win as impressive as any of Hulk Hogan's victories in the ring.
There really were two reasons why this big decision went Hogan's way. Number one was the legal point that the jury felt that airing a videotape is much different than reporting about it. But ultimately, even more than that, it was the fact that the jury fell in love with Hogan's performance and his persona and detested those Gawker executives. That's really what sealed the deal for Hulk Hogan.
The jury awarded Bollea a whopping $115 million in compensatory damages. This included $55 million in economic damages, plus another $60 million for his emotional distress.
The jury wasn't just ruling against Gawker, they were punishing them. And they made that very clear with $25 million in punitive damages alone, bringing the total judgment to an astounding $140 million. If Hulk Hogan was on the verge of bankruptcy after his divorce, he definitely wasn't having problems anymore.
Beyond the massive settlement, the case marked major changes in First Amendment rights for the media.
Freedom of speech and freedom of the press have been around for hundreds of years, but what we saw in the Hogan case is an interesting question of how those interact with the digital age, when with the click of a button, videos and other material can be posted, often without verification or vetting or even corroboration, and they still get published to millions of people almost instantly. This case is a major wake-up call for what standards should govern in those situations, especially when you get something as sensationalistic as a celebrity's sex life.
Hogan was looking at an Andre the Giant-sized payday, but his win hadn't come cheap. It's estimated that his legal team had racked up a $10 million plus bill. But just a few months after the trial ended, there was another twist. The majority of Hogan's legal fees have been paid by a financial backer, one with an axe to grind with Gawker, PayPal founder Peter Thiel.
In 2007, the tech blog Valleywag, which is part of the whole Gawker media empire, outed PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel as gay. Now, he said at the time that it totally tore his family apart, that it destroyed the lives of his friends who were mentioned in the article. And while at the time it was just a run-of-the-mill gossip post, maybe in poor taste perhaps, later on it would have huge ramifications.
Before this lawsuit, Gawker and other media outlets could publish a lot of things without these major repercussions. They didn't have to worry about going bankrupt. all of a sudden they needed to really stop and look at the pros and cons of what they were publishing and realize that one wrong move could ruin their company.
And he seized on the opportunity when he saw that there was a case against Gawker that could destroy the organization, and offered his money and services to Hulk Hogan, who readily agreed because he was broke at the time, bankrupt.
It's really rare for the third party to come in and back a lawsuit for someone just because they hate the defendant that much. But it's like the old adage, an enemy of an enemy is my friend. And boy, did that help Hulk Hogan.
Teal reportedly contributed around $10 million to support Hogan's case.
He reportedly funded many other lawsuits and took other efforts, all to drive Gawker out of business. He considers what he did standing up to a bully.
Gawker had been outmuscled in the courtroom. Their only option was to try and slow the bleeding.
Gawker filed 2 post-trial motions with the court in which Gawker argued that the amount of damages should be greatly reduced. Gawker also maintained that the emotional distress damages were excessive, comparing the figure to smaller awards in serious personal injury cases. The motions were denied, and the verdict would stand.
At that point, Gawker was between a rock and a hard place. It was either pay extensive legal fees, post a $50 million bond, and hope that a court of appeals reversed the jury's decision or at least reduce the verdict. Or Gawker could settle for around 1/3 of the judgment and lick their wounds.
2 months later, Gawker founder Nick Denton filed for bankruptcy. That same month, Univision Communications bought the business for $135 million.
Now, Hogan had received a $140 million verdict, but at this point, that's just a piece of paper. And especially with the bankruptcy court involved, the two parties had to negotiate an actual settlement for Hogan to receive money in his pocket. So what they did was offer $31 million down from the $140 million, and Hogan accepted it and still scored a big payday.
Hogan's net worth is now an estimated $25 million, and he's no longer in the dire financial circumstances that followed the divorce. His ex-wife, however, wasn't so happy about the settlement and said publicly that Hogan did not deserve any of the money from the Gawker suit. It's hard to imagine Linda not being upset by Hogan making money off of an affair that he had during their marriage.
For celebrities like Hogan, this case is cause for celebration over the fact that even public figures are entitled to have privacy. Our country is built on principles like free speech and freedom of the press. But this doesn't mean that private lives of celebrities are an open source of profits for anyone who happens to capture them on film. There are limits.
More than 4 decades after first lacing up his wrestling boots, Hulk Hogan won the most important fight of his life. Instead of a championship belt, he walked away $31 million richer. Cheating may have ruined his marriage, but it saved his bank account. And yet, the real legacy of the case will be its impact on First Amendment rights for the digital age.